Welcome to GameSpot Live. I'm Greg Kasavin here with the lowdown on War of the Monsters, a game by the developers of Twisted Metal Black. It's all about giant monsters kind of duking it out and beating the living snot out of each other, throwing each other around, destroying huge cities in the process. So it's a great concept. There aren't enough games about giant monsters doing this sort of thing. And there certainly aren't enough good ones. War of the Monsters definitely ranks up there with the better kind of monster melee games that have come out. The game really nails the kind of 50s, 60s sci-fi B-movie thing, and even though none of these are real movie monsters, they look just like them. You've got your kind of Godzilla ripoff and your King Kong ripoff. A couple of giant robots, giant insect, sort of the stuff you'd expect, and a couple of weirder ones too, like a cyclopic monster made entirely out of energy. War of the Monsters basically plays like a fighting game. As any of the monsters, you could execute kind of light and heavy attacks. You can grab either cars or rubble off the ground and throw it, or even grab opposing monsters. You could jump, you can climb buildings, and you can block. Every single monster, even though they look different, basically functions the same, and though their properties vary slightly, some are faster or slightly stronger than others, they pretty much are very similar. They even all have like two different super moves that are functionally quite similar. One kind of knocks down everything in the immediate vicinity, and the other one is kind of a concentrated blast. So you'll wish either that there were more monsters to choose from, or that the monsters were just more different from each other, had more to distinguish them. The gameplay really is pretty simple. You pretty much just have access to a number of canned combos and try to just beat the other guy up before he does the same to you, interspersing, blocks and throws to keep the other guy from getting too defensive and so forth. Sometimes the gameplay can be really fun. It's really satisfying to send a monster flying into a building and kind of crashing through it. There's a really great looking effect for when buildings take damage in the game. On the other hand, sometimes the gameplay can be a little frustrating. You'll find yourself out of action very often, either kind of getting knocked down and trying to get back on your feet, or trying to yank some object out of your body that's impaled your monster, which is an exercise in button mashing to the extreme. I'm all for a little bit of button mashing, but it's really just kind of ridiculous how hard you need to bang on your controller to recover from some of these moves. The game's single-player modes are pretty straightforward. There's what's called the adventure mode, which takes you through a series of scenarios where you'll fight all the other monsters in the game. It's sort of a story mode, but without the story. There's a last boss and everything, but unfortunately the adventure mode is exactly the same for every single monster. There are also endurance and free-for-all single-player modes. Regardless of the mode you pick, you'll find that the AI, the computer opponent in War of the Monsters, is really pretty dastardly. It's pretty cheap. It's smart. Basically, once you give it a good thrashing, it'll run off and make a beeline for all the power-ups in the level, restoring its health, and then it'll come right back after you. This makes for a pretty serious challenge even on the medium difficulty setting, but I don't know about you, but I've never seen Godzilla walk away from a fight. I mean, it just seems inconsistent with the theme of the game to watch, as a giant praying mantis or a giant robot or something suddenly just runs away from the scene of a battle in search of his little health power-up. As with pretty much any fighting game, War of the Monsters is more fun for two players. The game has a nice effect where there's a split-screen view when you and the other player are on different sides of the arena, but if you get close enough, the split screen kind of melts away and suddenly you're both there on a single screen. This does have some problems since the game can move really, really fast sometimes, and the split-screen shifting doesn't always quite keep up, so sometimes one player or both will find themselves disoriented and wondering where the heck they are. But this isn't a big issue, and War of the Monsters can be a lot of fun for two like-minded giant monster fans. Again, though, it's too bad that only two people can play the game at the same time. War of the Monsters has a bunch of unlockable costumes and a couple of unlockable characters, plus a few kind of throwaway unlockable mini-games that you can get at once you play through the single-player portion enough times. But really, the game won't necessarily hold your interest for too long. It's quite simple. The different monsters don't feel nearly as different as they look. But even though War of the Monsters isn't exactly going to make you throw away your copy of Virtua Fighter 4, it sure as heck looks good. It looks pretty amazing, in fact. It runs at just a really, really smooth frame rate, and there's tons of detail both in the monsters and in the different environments. The different environments really are probably the star of the show. They just look great, and you'll see, hordes of people running around and screaming on the ground, and little cop cars trying to keep the peace, and you could pick them up and throw them into buildings and nice stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, if you're a fan of the source material, War of the Monsters is really going to offer you a lot of cool stuff to look at and to see. It's too bad the graphics alone can't carry the gameplay forever, and since War of the Monsters is pretty limited in that regard, it's probably going to serve you better as a weekend rental than kind of a permanent addition to your collection of games. With that said, War of the Monsters is successful on a lot of levels and can be really quite fun. So if you've been jonesing for another giant monster game since playing Rampage back in the late 80s, really this one is about as good as you're going to get these days.